I'm the director of the European Journalism Center, and I'm quite proud to be able to present the Verification Handbook that we published. I actually have one paper version here. This is it. It is available online. You can download it. We will have some paper books printed as well, but I just have, I think, 4 copies at the moment. So, Craig, the author, gets one. I get one. Rina gets one. And
everyone else gets one. But just for you, yeah.
And so I'll just leave it to Rina Debunking, my colleague here, to introduce the panel and to walk you through what we're going to do in the next hour or so. Here we go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thanks. Thank you very much for joining us today for this session on the Verification Handbook. My name is Rina. I'm working for European Journalism Center, leading this the Verification Handbook initiative at the center, but also working on this new project, well, not really new actually. A year and a half ago, we launched this website called Emergency Journalism, focusing on the digital age reporting during the crisis situation, whether it's natural disaster or man-made disasters. So yeah, that's my introduction, and this session will focus on the why verification, like why do we have to do this verification today. Also, we would like to discuss some of the issues surrounding the verification, and also the possibility to talk about the to get the tips and like some of the suggestions in terms of tools from the panelists as well. I'd like to introduce by the way, for your background information, all the panelists today have contributed to the Verification Handbook. And right next to me, Craig Silverman. He is the managing editor for the Verification Handbook. He's also working as an editor of the Regret the Errors at the Poynter Institute. And next to him, Steve Battery. He's working for the Digital First Media. And he wrote the chapter on the fundamentals of, about the verification. Next to him, Claire Wordle. She's a research fellow at the House Center at the Columbia University, and she wrote this chapter on the verifying the user-generated content, the very important chapter as well. Next to her, Caroline Bannock. She wrote a case study on the photo verification, and I'm pretty sure she will be sharing more insights and the experience of the Guardian witness, because she's working with the Guardian. And finally, Matthew Ingram from GigaOM. And he wrote about how to utilize the power of the crowds during the, especially when you're doing the verification alone. There's a lot to be done, so how do you make sure to make use of the power of the crowds on the social networks? So maybe before starting off with the panel discussion, I just want to give you a quick overview of what the handbook is all about. It provides step-by-step guidelines, the guidelines on how to deal with the user-generated content, whether it's video uploaded on the YouTube or the Instagram photos and so on. How do you make sure that whatever you're using on the social networks are authentic content? So this verification handbook aims to tackle that. We also included several aspects that surrounds the verification as such. For example, how to prepare your newsroom before the disaster happens. How do you structure your communication process? How do you make sure also to deal with the source protection? Because obviously, if you show the YouTube video, there was one example that the one of the chapter discussed was showing the video of the teenager who's homosexual and then being abused in the video. But obviously, if you show the face of the victim, there might be some consequence after the publishing this kind of video. So how to deal with that? And also we talked about, we also included a section on the, what was it? Let me see. Yeah, the ethical aspects as well. Yeah, but anyways, maybe before I go and talk about the handbook as such, maybe you can give an example, the insights and the sort of the takeaways, highlights from your chapter, and also about the why verification today. And if you can talk about the some of the examples that you saw in terms of the false and fake information as well.
Hi, so as Rena said, my name is Craig Silverman. I was lucky enough to edit the book. So each person here will give a little bit of an overview of the chapter they worked on and some of the lessons from that. And so for me, I had the best job, which is I got to think about what the chapters needed to be, but also I got to choose the best possible people who I would want to write these chapters. So some of the folks up here and others who aren't here today were picked to write about areas where they have specific expertise, and so you'll see some of that today. For me, two things. One is the challenge of verification is, there's certainly more opportunity with it than ever before because there is so much interesting content flowing at all times across, many different networks. There's so much important, interesting, insightful information there, and that's the great opportunity. The risk is that there are so many hoaxes, there's so much misinformation that flows, that verification has always been at the fundamental of what journalists do. But today it's even more important, and we have more tools to be able to help with it, whether it's things like Google Street Map or other tools that are out there. But it's also very risky because there are people who are consciously putting out fake things to create fear, to create mistrust, to have a laugh, and other things. So it's really important today because anyone is able to publish, and with anyone able to publish, you're able to gather information that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. But of course, the discipline of journalism is at its core, it's been said, a discipline of verification. The second point that I'll just make quickly is the book is focused on a lot of crisis and disaster situations. So natural disasters and other things like that. So it's actually not just written for journalists. We also have humanitarian aid organizations who contributed best practices, but also case studies to the book. And what that says is, in a media environment when anyone can publish, you also have anyone being able to be involved in the process of verification. It's a much more open and collaborative process, and Matthew can talk a little bit about that. So it's not just about journalists. It's really about anyone being able to judge the quality of the information they see out there. And this is particularly important in crisis situations because, there's a natural human tendency to amplify and create rumor during these situations. When we don't understand what's going on, when there is what seems to be imminent danger, we are more inclined to repeat things that may be false because we think it's important to pass along that information. So we focused on crisis situations, one, because there's really a broad use cases for that. And then the second is that it's dealing with kind of an innate human tendency where a lot of misinformation emerges during these situations. You see it all the time in all parts of the world, and that's not new. One of the first studies of rumor done in the 1930s of an earthquake in India found there was a wide variety of rumors and misinformation that spread. Today they tend to spread very fast, so it's important to be able to have the tools and techniques to go after that. So I'll pass it on to Steve to talk about some of the fundamentals that are exist regardless of social networks and other things.
Well, I will start by echoing praise and appreciation for the approach Craig just mentioned of targeting this book not just to journalists and the work that we do, but to the other people, the emergency workers, the activists, and aid organizations that are part of the news ecosystem. Even if they don't think of themselves as journalists, they are contributing to the information flow, and I think that by working with them on verification fundamentals, we improve the accuracy of the information flow, but we also build our credibility. We let them know how important we think verification and accuracy are, and so I was delighted at that approach to this book. Kind of the key point of my chapter on verification fundamentals was that the most important question of journalism to me isn't one of the 5 W's. It's the question, how do you know that? And sometimes it's a journalist asking a source, how do you know that? Sometimes it's an editor or a news director asking a journalist in the field, how do you know that? And sometimes you have to ask that in the third person. When you get a piece of user-generated content, a picture, a video, that you're trying to verify and figure it out, you ask it in the third person, how do they know that? You know, do they show their work? Do they show how they know it? And all of our sources have just a piece of the story, have some flaws in their knowledge, you know, obviously video is a huge part of the story now. I actually in the book tell a story, and it's not an emergency situation at all, of a story I did in the 90s about a story that happened in the 70s where video was better than eyewitness accounts because it was about a girls' basketball championship game. And the legend that had grown up through the years said one thing about how the girls won the game. I talked to girls who played the game on both sides 25 years later and media who covered it, and everybody was telling me the same story, and it wasn't until I watched the video that I realized they were exaggerating, whether it was a huge moment in their lives because they lost, or whether it was a huge moment in their life because they won. Or whether they were neutral, it had gotten exaggerated over time, and I needed to go to the documentation. And so we've got the availability of so much more video now, but we've got to verify that it's real. But you know, so you want to look at the documentation. You want to find the eyewitnesses. You want to find the secondhand witness. You know, the people who've heard about it. And in each case, you want to ask, how do you know that, or how do they know that, and try and get back to the best sources you can and multiple sources. And so that was the point of the verification fundamentals chapter. And I add a second question that my colleague Rosalie Stemmer likes to teach when she's teaching accuracy, and she asks, how else do you know that? And I think that's really critical to it, is you need to keep asking and nail down how do they know that, and is it really true?
So in my chapter, I wanted to kind of sum up what I've learned over the last 5 years training lots of journalists in social news gathering and verification. And when I travel to lots of newsrooms, editors in particular want verification to be black and white. They want to be able to say, this is 100% verified. And unfortunately, that is never possible. Never possible unless you're actually at the event yourself witnessing something. But you can, through lots of checks, understand that this is a process. And in that process, as you do the checks, you're essentially building up a case, like a legal case, and you're looking for pieces of evidence. So in my chapter, I was really emphasizing this idea of verification as process, and saying there are 4 main checks that you need to do when you find a piece of content. The very first one is to look at provenance. One of the biggest problems with content that's circulated on social media around emergency situations and any news event is the problem of scraping, which is the problem of somebody taking down the original piece of content on YouTube and re-uploading it on their own account. And often they are 8-year-old boys in Portugal who just like doing this. So on big news events, you can sometimes have up to 500 copies of the breaking news event. And often the piece of content that has the most views isn't the original piece of content. So when you start your verification process, it's, are you looking at the original piece of content? Once you know that, then you can start doing your verification checks. And within verification, there are a number of different checks you can do, and they're all outlined in the handbook brilliantly, but it's very much about saying, what can you say with a degree of certainty? And the 3 checks I focus on are source. Who is the person? Who is the uploader? What's their social history? What clues have they given you about, were they in the area? Do they normally upload this type of content? When did they join the social network? There's a whole host of information you can get from somebody's digital footprint. So who is the source? Secondly, what's the date? And one of the problems with social networks is they all have different ways of showing something. So a date on YouTube, a date stamp on YouTube, is always date stamped to the time in California. So if somebody uploads content in Syria, the date stamp is what time is that in California. You need to know that because on Twitter, the date stamp is the settings that you have set your Twitter account to. On Facebook, there are 2 date stamps, depending on whether you're looking at it on the news feed or the profile. So that's the level of checking you need to do. So we've talked about source, we've talked about date. The third thing is location. And certain social networks allow you to look at geolocation that's automatically embedded in a tweet if somebody has turned on GPS. But bear in mind with Twitter, if I tweeted now and have my GPS on, in my tweet it would say from Perugia. If you click from Perugia, a Google map will open and an arrow will point right here, which is fine because I'm in Perugia. If I was in my house at home, I wouldn't be so happy about that big arrow. On Facebook, when I geolocate on Facebook, it gives me options and I can choose. I can choose to say that I'm currently in Antarctica. So there's a difference between geolocation, again, on different networks. And the best thing to do, of course, is to get somebody on the phone and talk to them, which is proper verification. But what my process was, understanding those technical checks you can do as well as getting people on the phone. And of course, geolocation, Craig was right. You're looking at the video or the photo, you bring up Google Street View and you say, yes, I can see that. I can see the direction that the camera is pointing in. So we've got incredible tools out there in technology, but it's always about combining that technology with old-fashioned journalism, which hopefully you can do by talking to them on the phone. So my chapter was about those processes.
And my chapter was actually a case study of putting those processes together. And at The Guardian, the content on Guardian Witness often goes onto The Guardian. I mean, that's the whole purpose of it. So we have to be absolutely certain that everything that we tell the journalists to use on The Guardian is actually properly verified. So we had a lot of storms in the UK this last year, and on one storm, there was a giant beach ball in the centre of London, bouncing around the centre of London, and we thought, well, is this true? This looks like a hoax. How do we know it's true? So as Claire was talking about, was you need to look at the location. We knew it was Old Street because we live in London, so we know it's Old Street. So we knew that bit, but we didn't know that there was a giant beach ball in Old Street. So we sort of searched on Google, we checked out where there was a giant beach ball, and indeed there was. There was one tethered to a building at one point. Then we wanted to see whether the person who'd actually uploaded it was a real person. So we went onto Twitter immediately, and we saw that people were talking about this beach ball in the streets. So we knew that was happening. So what we did then was we contacted that person, because obviously that's the most important thing to do. And they seemed to be okay. It seemed to be correct. And that obviously worked. And then we checked their social history. So I think it's always about putting all these things together at the same time and working out whether it's actually credible. And then there was a tweet of the giant beach ball that was deflated. So we had the whole story. And one of the most important things always is to make sure the image is actually not used elsewhere. Was it Photoshopped? Was it actually uploaded that day? So we always Google reverse image everything. And it appeared nowhere. And I think news is published very quickly. So we knew it was from that day. We had the date stamp on it. And from that, we realized it was a real piece of content. So we wrote a blog about it.
I get to go last. So my chapter in the book was about using the crowd. And I think if you look at any sort of major event, news event that's happened since the internet became popular, you see the crowd at work, either for good or for evil. As Craig pointed out, whenever a news event happens, people feel this impulse to share information, and that's good. Unfortunately, many of them don't care or aren't interested in spending the time to figure out whether it's true or not. So you get a huge volume of information, much of which is wrong. And it's not that people are deliberately sharing things they know to be wrong. They just don't have time or the inclination or the ability to figure out whether it's true. And so that's, for me at least, that is one of the key factors that journalists bring to a news event, the ability to say this is true or this is not true. It's pretty fundamental. And the key now at least is that journalists can't do that, even if they could in the past, which I would argue they couldn't, that even now they can't do it by themselves. You cannot realistically verify in real time events that are occurring halfway around the world without using people who are on the scene, people who are uploading content, people who are involved in that event in some way. So then you have to, if you are careful, and if you use the kinds of skills that Andy Carbon did during the Arab Spring, for example, you can effectively employ a kind of networked journalistic process where you reach out to people who are involved in that event or near that event or know someone, and you can use them to help you verify those facts or that event. The key, I think, which Andy would probably make if he was here, is that you see a lot of journalists now who have realized that this can be very powerful, going on social networks where they have never participated before, and saying, hey, I'd like to know a lot about this bombing. So could you, everyone out there who knows anything, could you please tell me what you know? Which is asking a lot of people, and if you haven't already made contact with them or engaged with them or made it obvious that you're interested in taking part in that type of thing, to just post a request is kind of rude, frankly, and to expect people to just take time out of their day to help you verify a fact so you can put it in your story is asking a lot. And I think what Andy did quite well is to show the value of the social networks that you already have. So for example, he already knew people in Egypt and in the Arab countries so he could reach out to them and say, look, I am trying to do this thing, do you know anyone? They would pass on his name to someone else. And that kind of, those social connections are what can be as important, if not more important, than just getting the actual facts from specific people. So in my chapter, I talk about the value of how you engage with people. How do you get them to help you? And that, I think, is a crucial element of using the crowd for verification.
Thank you, everyone. So we'd like to talk about the issues surrounding the verification. And I think the point that Matthew mentioned was great about the network, the journalistic process, and utilizing the crowd, the power of the crowd network, to carry out the verification process. But one of the things I wanted to ask all of you is how much can you go with when you are dealing with the people on the ground, especially in the countries like Syria, who want to show what is happening on the ground. The reason why I'm asking this question is that I recently went to the refugee camp of the Syrian refugees in Jordan, and they were really excited when we brought the journalists there that they get the media exposure. Obviously, that might be a potential risk for the people who are on the ground, who's shooting the content for our media coverage. So how can you draw a fine line? How much can you go as a journalist when you're dealing with a crowd?
I mean, I'll just say very quickly, I mean, the starting point is that you assume everything you're being told and everything you're seeing is false. And you do the work to then prove otherwise. If you start by assuming that everything you're being told is true, then taking that sort of bias or taking that as your starting point, you're more likely, it's called confirmation bias, you're more likely to want it to be true. And this is something that journalists fall victim to all the time, in that, if something someone tells us is really interesting or really incredible or perfect for our story, then we actively want it to be true. And part of verification is almost like hacking your brain so that you just completely have this skeptical pose, so that if somebody is telling you something, or if you see a tweet, or and that tweet contains an image, your first assumption is, as Claire said, is maybe that's been scraped, maybe it's been faked, it's not from them, it's somewhere else. And then if you take that pose, then as you go along and follow the process, then you can figure out what actually is true. So I mean, the starting point for me is you're trying to prove that it's not false rather than trying to confirm that it's true.
Rena, were you asking how far should you go, like how much you should involve people who are in a risky... That's what I thought you were asking.
Yeah, that's another aspect.
Right. So it seems to me that is, in terms of ethically at least, when you are asking people to help you in a journalistic function, I think you have to consider what are you asking them to do in terms of how it's going to affect them, their safety and so on. If you say, I'd really like to get some shots of that sniper, and that encourages someone to go out in public and put themselves in danger, obviously they're taking the risk and they're making that decision, but I think if you're encouraging them, you have to think about what you're asking them to do and for nothing, effectively. You're not going to pay them. It's not like they're a war photographer and, they'll win an award if they don't get shot. So I think it is something you have to consider if you're asking them to help you do your job.
And part of that consideration is not just the immediate danger of shooting a picture or whatever in a war or disaster situation, but it's some of the metadata that Claire mentioned, that they
Like
might not
their
be in
identity,
immediate
for example,
danger,
right.
but if they're pinpointing where they are and
Exactly.
that they're
Right.
reporting on this, that they're placing
Sure.
themselves in some danger that we need to take into account as we're
Yeah.
asking the crowd, hey, anybody got any pictures of this?
Yeah, I think you have to be very careful because actually there is a really fine line between asking people to share content and send content. And I was sort of concerned, I think we're always concerned, and at The Guardian I'm concerned about, you can't commission people, particularly in a dangerous situation, and it's got to be that they want to share it. So I think language around this is really, really important. But also, if say it's a sort of anti-government protest and people are sending content to me and it's showing people, and you can see their faces, and you can see that they're involved in activity that security services would be really interested in, we don't publish that content. So I think we actually can't expect users to know what they're doing, and we have to really act and help them in their security ourselves, and we have that responsibility.
Just very quickly also, I think we forget the power of some of these tools because I do some work with UNHCR, and often people who work with protection will say, you take a picture of a 4-year-old boy, you don't realize that by the time that gets retweeted, then picked up by BuzzFeed and then retweeted somewhere else, that 4-year-old boy suddenly can be on the front cover of every newspaper. And so I think these issues are so important because of the power of these tools we have in our hand, and I think sometimes it's easy to forget that. And the uploaders certainly often don't think where their content is going to end up when they share something.
Another issue, the possible issue, actually, is that non-existing standard in terms of verification. That's one reason why we came up with this handbook to begin with, because there's no, I was really surprised to talk to some of the journalists basically grabbing the content on the Twitter and then without doing any sort of verification process, and then just, included a credit source Twitter, and also the in terms of the methods, it's completely different according to the newsrooms. Maybe Claire, if you can start with this aspect, and how much transparency do we need also in terms of this content's verified or not verified.
So I'm actually in the process of a big piece of research with my colleague Sam, who's sitting in the audience, that's been funded by the Tau Centre, about user-generated content. And we actually have interviewed 64 journalists in 38 countries about these types of issues. And what was shocking to me when we spoke to these journalists is there's huge ignorance about verification. Journalists know that they have to do it, but there's real ignorance about the checks that we've all been talking about. So the threshold, Rena's saying there isn't a standardized almost checklist that newsrooms around the world follow. So the people that normally make the decision about should it go on air are often senior editors who, it's a long time since they're on a news desk, and when they were last on a news desk, they weren't working with these social networks. So they'll say things like, well, it's just gut instinct. It's not gut instinct. There are the types of checks that we're talking about. So I think what's really interesting here is not only do newsrooms themselves not understand the level of verification they should be doing with online material, but we're not sharing that with the audience. So our research looked at, for example, how many pieces of content were even labeled as user-generated content or amateur footage. And 72% of the content that we looked at had no such label. So the audience doesn't know that it's user-generated content. They don't know whether it's been verified. And as you also know, many newsrooms use the disclaimer these pictures cannot be verified because it's UGC. Well, that's a lie, because you can do those checks. So I think there's a real issue here. And this isn't about pointing fingers. You know, it's 5 years since that plane landed in the Hudson River. That was January 2009. At that point, I like to say there was probably about 10 journalists around the world who knew how to find it, how to verify it, and knew whether they could use it. So news gathering has changed so much, so quickly, that as an industry, we're trying to catch up. So this certainly isn't about blame, but we're certainly at a point in 2014 when we need to sort ourselves out. Get off my soapbox.
And I think that part of what we need to do, in addition to learning the skills and learning the tools and those sorts of things, is to train the gut instinct. The more a piece of information or a piece of content excites you, the more you need to remind yourself that if it looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. And you know, so the gut instinct needs to be, we've got to check this out, we've got to nail this down. That needs to be part of the thought process of the journalist on the ground, covering things on the front line, and it needs to be the thought process of the editors and news directors back in the newsrooms saying, wait a second, how have we checked this out? How do you know that? And asking it again and again. How do they know that?
You know, I think I often say the most dangerous person is a person who's well-meaning but doesn't have enough time on their hands. So if someone's waiting at a bus stop, or they're in the line at the bank, and they see a tweet and it says, "Oh, it snowed on the Sphinx, you know, or the pyramids. Wow, that's cool." Retweet, you know, and they don't have time to check and see whether, go search Google and see if that's a picture from a diorama from 3 years ago. I've shared pictures like that myself because I just, I had 5 minutes to check Twitter. I saw a cool picture. You retweet it. Effectively, you're part of the problem because you haven't taken the time to verify that.
Maybe we can get some questions from the crowds, from the audience. Are there any questions to the panelists? Yeah, go ahead. Maybe there's a microphone.
Up here, up front, there's a question.
Hi. You hear me?
Yeah.
No, thanks to the microphone. So I'm a freelance journalist, and I will ask you, how do you cope with Facebook posts that can be retrodated? I mean, if I'm going to publish something that is dated in the 1825, I can do that on Facebook, of course. So do you have to contact Facebook and ask them to see to see inside the servers or something else? And how do you cope with Twitter research? I mean, nowadays you can scratch the API from Twitter for just 14 days back in the past. So if you have to check something that is maybe 1 month ago, maybe could be a problem. So do you know, can you find out some tools that can help you to go back and back in the past?
Craig, do you know?
Yeah, I mean, so on the first point, I mean, I think it's been said many times. So in the Facebook example, rather than reaching out to Facebook, you want to reach out to the person who put that post up. And that's just, kind of an old school journalist thing, that these are some of the things that just never go out of style. Cultivating sources and talking to them, reaching out to people and talking to them. So, if somebody has something up there and something seems a bit off or it just looks interesting, that first step of messaging them on Facebook, of, adding a comment to the image saying, hey, can you contact me? And seeing, as Claire said, where else are they online? What other networks are they on? Did they also share this image there? What's the date on that? So there's a lot of kind of triangulation you can do, but fundamentally contacting that person and asking the questions and hearing what they say and how they say it, and if they can provide other images from that same event, maybe that you're interested in. I mean, that's really the powerful way. Typically, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, the social networks themselves are not typically very helpful in these scenarios. And I'm not saying they're trying to be obstinate, it's just they have a tremendous amount of content flowing over them, and they see themselves as, a carrier of it. Mm-hmm. So Facebook isn't actively going to be involved in the verification process with you, although they did recently launch, in partnership with Storeful, a verified newswire of interesting content on Facebook. As for Twitter, and anyone jump in, I know that there's a service called Topsy, which is now, it's owned by Apple, so I know they're starting to kind of degrade some of the things they offer, but that used to give you some decent archive access. And there is Twitter Advanced Search as well, which is really powerful. You can search, through things like location, specific words, and other kinds of more detailed search that can be useful. But yeah, the truth is that a lot of the networks are kind of degrading some of the, the detailed searching that you can do, and that sometimes is a barrier.
Yeah, Topsy's owned by Apple, and GNIP used to be another source of. They got the whole fire hose and historical data, and Twitter just bought them. So,
yeah, so
presumably...
There's GNIP and DataSift are the two big...
Yeah, DataSift is the only remaining independent. So you can use some of those tools. Some of them cost quite a lot of money. So it's not something you would want to do just for any reason, but it can be done, at least for now, until Twitter stops letting you.
And you can particularly with older tweets, Google can sometimes be helpful too.
True.
And of course, in the emergency situations that we're talking about, the time issue for Twitter isn't really very often an issue. But the power of Twitter's advanced search is very helpful, with the caveat that most people, for the reasons that Claire mentioned, that they're uncomfortable with setting out their location. Plus, it's not the default setting to put your location there. You have to go in actively and change it on your settings.
Geocoding is weak.
Yeah, so that most people don't have location enabled. So you need to, if you're using Twitter's advanced search, try it with and without the location filter. Maybe put a location keyword in there, like Perugia or something like that.
And in fact, geocoding can lead you astray as well. There was a recent story that I think Vox did that referred to porn consumption habits and made certain assumptions around Republican states versus Democratic states based on the GPS geocoding of people who are accessing certain sites. That Google defaults to the center of the state if it can't triangulate your location properly. So if it has a bad signal or whatever. So it was locating a whole bunch of people in the center of certain states when they weren't anywhere near that actual location. So certain, assumptions are made based on flawed data.
But something that can be helpful is a tool called Geophedia that pulls in multiple different types of geocoded, and the geocoding in photographs tends to be more accurate than Twitter geocoding. Yeah. And so if it's pulling in Instagram or Flickr or YouTube kinds of contributions, that might have more reliable geocoding. But then you still need to do your checks.
And once Google gets better at following us all the time, I'm sure that problem will go away.
Question for the entire panel. Is there a business model for journalists or media in verification?
So you should you pay extra for the facts, you mean?
I would say that being a trusted source for information in this environment where there is so much noise and there is so much information that is questionable, that being a trusted source for information adds value. It's not a business model in itself, but if you figure out a business model, whether that's advertising or subscriptions or direct transactions or events or some sort of combination of those sorts of things, that being a trusted source and placing value on verification in your workflow, that the community will, some of the community will trust that. Some of the community doesn't care, and they're not gonna. It's not gonna be valuable for them. But I think that being reliable does have value.
There is a specific example. I mentioned them once already, and Claire used to work with them. A company called Storyful. They are basically an outsourced verification operation, partnering with newsrooms. So they work with ABC News and the New York Times and the BBC, and they are experts at verifying and clearing the rights to user-generated content. And they were bought by News Corp a few months ago. for what was reported to be 25 million. I cannot independently confirm that number, so I'll put a caveat on it.
I'll retweet it, though.
Yeah, please put that out, everyone. So I mean, that is an example of verification at the core of a business model, but it's one example. And I could actually give you more examples of places that actually sell rumors. ESPN has an insider offering that people pay for per month, and one of the big pitches as part of it is you get the best rumors, things that might turn out to be true, but just the best rumors. And there's a lot of rumor sites in sports that actually sell that. So in terms of monetizing it, I think Steve's point is valid that people are probably more willing to pay for a news source if they think what they're going to get is accurate. I think that you'll have a very tough time getting a paywall and other things going if people think you're just publishing whatever you find. But interestingly, there is the opposite as well, where there are some really sort of what you might call quality rumor sites. People who are really, really interested in a specific topic will actually want access to unverified information, and often in cases because they think they can judge the accuracy of it themselves. So it's kind of an interesting economy around verification and rumor right now.
I also think it's important to think about the uploader as well and the trust around that. I mean, because you're as good as your content. You've got to have right content, but it's about your relationships with the people that send their content to you. And do they trust you? Do you do the right thing with their content? And I think that's really important, actually, on this issue too.
I know Clay Christensen, who's the guru of sort of disruption, commercial disruption, likes to talk about media in terms of what he calls jobs to be done. So the economic value in journalism is now in completing those jobs to be done that readers have. And he said one that he said, the job I don't need done is to have someone tell me what just happened, because everyone and their aunt is now fulfilling that function. The job I need to be done is someone to tell me what is true and what's not. And so if he sees that as a job that's worth doing, he'll probably be willing to pay for it.
Think also of how important getting trust built into the eBay buying and selling system was. Mm-hmm. Of course, now eBay is funding or eBay Wealth is funding Andy Carvin and Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi and some other top flight journalists, but that system would not have worked without being able to build trust in there. And so if in our curation and reporting of news and of user-generated content surrounding news, if we can find a similar way to add value through trust, I think there certainly is a business model. I think it's part of a business model. I don't think it's a business model, but it's a piece of a business model.
Let's say we're hoping.
Yeah. Actually, Caroline, with Guardian Witness, Guardian has basically launched its own kind of user-generated content platform. What was sort of the thinking around that, I guess, on that point?
Well, I think, the Guardian has a long relationship, with its community. It's very important to the Guardian. And we wanted to create a platform which enabled them to share more content with us, so they can send images and video and text to us now. And, we wanted to involve people more in our journalism and our stories. And actually, we've been going a year. We've been incredibly successful. We've had amazing stories around protests, around, with the Woolwich incident last year in the UK, we got a picture sent in from someone who had been at the scene 2 minutes after it happened and sent it to us. But I think for the Guardian, there is the trust there already, which really helped Guardian Witness. And it's very important that in all our dealings with people, that they continue to trust us. And I think, as I said before, it's making sure that we respect their content, credit their content correctly. We're lucky at the Guardian that we're connected to the CMS, that Guardian Witness content is connected to the CMS. So when it gets put into the Guardian, it comes in with all its furniture intact. We're not tampering with their content. We're not taking the bit that we want. We're making sure that it's actually what they want to say, and I think that's very important.
Just a quick note regarding Topsy. I'm not really sure, but Apple might close it. Yeah. So that's a pretty bad story for me because I used it. I think it was a huge resource for historical data. But as it looks like, they're going to close it.
Yeah, the BBC wanted to renew its contract, and Topsy said no at the professional level. So that was a sign to me that it's.
Yeah, mine was cancelled. Yeah.
Other questions? So one thought I just had actually really quickly is we've mentioned some tools. Now the book is free, and you can just go to the website and read it. We have a list of tools. So what tools haven't we mentioned that people should know about?
Google Burst Image, you mentioned.
Yeah, I think reverse image has one.
The telephone?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
The telephone, there you go.
What have we not said?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is Google reverse image search. Quite a few people know that. What you might not know is that with video, a really good thing to do is to take the thumbnail of a video and run that thumbnail through Google reverse image search. So when I was talking about scrapes, if you find a YouTube video and you're worried, is this the original, take the screen grab of the thumbnail and run that through Google reverse image search. And you know, Caroline will say that saved The Guardian a couple of times.
A few times, yeah. I sort of actually know that massacre wasn't actually 3 months ago. It was 5 years ago. I mean, it works incredibly well.
So one I'll mention is it's called a Whois search. If you see a website, it's kind of less about social media, but if you see something shared on social media and it points to a website maybe you're not familiar with, if you do a Whois search, it will tell you when that domain name was registered. It may even tell you who registered it and give you contact information for that person. This is particularly useful in debunking hoaxes, because oftentimes if people have set up a fake website, they've set it up pretty recently. So if it's a website for a company claiming to have been in business for 5 years, but the domain was registered 6 weeks ago, you know that there's a problem there. And that may sound like a really simple thing that hoaxsters should find some way around, but it actually outs people. Every April Fool's Day, somebody gets caught because of a Whois search. So keep that in your toolbox as well.
Can I just, sorry, very quickly on that. If somebody is really good, they will buy, for example, craigsilverman.com, and if they want to hide their information, they will pay an extra $20 to hide that. Mm-hmm. But they might also buy craigsilverman.net and craigsilverman.co.
Stop giving people ideas, Claire. What's going on here?
But they won't pay the extra $20 to hide that.
I actually own all those domain names already.
So, in all seriousness, this is important. If you're doing a Whois search, look at other varieties of that domain name, and sometimes you can get clues because people don't pay the extra to hide on other versions.
It's also surprising how few journalists, when they're citing Twitter, not only sort of engage in skepticism, but fail to check the profile or who that person's following. Oftentimes you'll find that profile was created a week ago. They're following 3 people. They've never tweeted before. I mean, these things are pretty simple things to check, but when you're in a hurry and it seems so good, too good to check, as we used to say.
Well, and when you check that profile, then you can also see, particularly if it's somebody who's legitimate, you can see other people that they have conversed with that you might be able to contact more easily than you can contact this person directly, and use the telephone, and they say, oh yeah, that's Matthew, he's good, I know he's there, I talked to him, last week.
And of course, that's how Andy Carvin created his network. He started with half a dozen people or a dozen and asked each one of them to suggest somebody they thought was credible, and then effectively built out this vast network quite quickly.
We still have about 10 minutes. So
There's a question.
Hi. I would like to ask you about the contents coming from Ukraine, if you have any opinion about them, and if there's any, let's say, Andy Carvin style Twitter accounts that we can follow to find, verified contents from Ukraine.
Do you know any?
It hasn't been mentioned, but it's worth, if you're a journalist, joining the Storyful Open Newsroom, which is a community on Google+, and they share content that they know. And at the moment, there's a lot of stuff around Ukraine, and there's a lot of journalists from that area who will translate or will help, or, that's one resource I think it's worth following.
Yeah, I agree.
If there is are there any other questions? So if there is I want to ask something about the disaster preparedness in the newsroom and how, because there's several different models that we are witnessing. For example, like one model, I think AFP is relying on the verification being done by the correspondents and stringers, and there's no core social media team who is doing the verification. While I think AP, I'm not sure if Fergus is still here.
He's just left.
Oh, he just left.
Yeah.
Damn. So yeah, so that's, you know, the AP's model is more focusing on the social media verification team, like at the core. What is the best model for the newsroom, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, from the research that we've just been doing, we went to a number of different newsrooms, and you might know this, but the BBC has a UGC hub, and because the BBC has quite a lot of money, it's staffed by 18 people, and it's a great model. And so we would ask different people, do you think you need that? And I'd say kind of 3 years ago, people would say, no, everybody in the newsroom should have those skills. I think now what people are saying is, everybody should have an awareness of this and should have some basic skills. But if you're going to go in and verify very detailed content from Syria or, you know, rebels in Congo, you can't turn up on a Monday and suddenly get into that community and understand it. So I think people are understanding now that journalists should all be upskilled, but you really need a kind of a crack team of people who absolutely know how to do this very well. And in almost all newsrooms, they would say, well, actually, there's that guy, and that guy normally speaks Arabic. There's an understanding that language is such a barrier around verification that there's an awareness that you do need people with special skills, and that's normally language skills, and it's also a real understanding of how to do this kind of forensic verification.
I guess I would say, since my chapter was about using the crowd, I think that it is important to have people in the newsroom for sure, but if you are a beat reporter, or you have a topic you focus on, or you have an area you specialize in, or you're dedicated to a specific geographic area, you have to do what Andy Carvin did. You have to build your own social network for verification. You have to. You cannot, and good reporters have always had that. They've always had people they can go to, but it's always had to be in person or on the phone. Now you have to build a digital network to help you do that verification in real time. You can't always fall back on the team in the newsroom. You have to do it yourself.
Yeah, on the topic of sort of the disaster preparedness, so there is a chapter on that. The author is with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, so she's not here. Just a couple of things, and it ties right into what Matthew said there. You know, one of the ways that they prepare, for them, it's, you know, often sort of natural disasters where there's sort of a season to it. You know, they think about all of the authoritative sources that will be important when, you know, a cyclone hits or something like that. And they go out and they make a list of all of the experts in the area, of all the emergency organizations, and they go out and they meet with them and they connect with them beforehand. And this goes right to Matthew's point, which is, you know, you can do that in person. You can build up your network of sources, identify the people that might be really, really important and useful in that moment, so that you have the lines of communication open, and sometimes they can even offer training and other insight for preparedness. The other piece is sort of on the digital level, where you should be building out and maintaining a digital network. And I think that's probably a little bit of the Guardian's work with Witness, where they grow this network every day. And you never know when somebody who maybe, you know, joined Witness or has been aware of it will suddenly be in the right place at the right time. And the more you can establish that and grow that, the better chance you have of getting really quality information early on. So, you know, that preparing the sources and building out your network was one of the really key tips from that chapter. Another one is to also establish what your workflow is and the communications tools that you're going to use. So how are you going to communicate as a team? Who is going to take the lead? What's the process of gathering information, verifying it, and then deciding, you know, who signs off on it? So doing these things ahead of time, because the worst time to try and figure out your verification process is when something really big has just happened. That's the worst moment to do it. And not only because you won't have anything established, but also because, again, in that moment of urgency, you know, it's actually a physical reaction. It's a psychological reaction. We go into what's called fight or flight mode. And it's very difficult to make sort of detached, rational decisions, as much as you may feel you're doing that. So on the preparedness angle, really doing things ahead of time and setting the stage to be successful is tremendously important.
Are there any questions? We can take them.
Yeah.
Hello, Julie Pizzetti from Australia. Quite a few of us have been writing about verification for many years. I remember the first time I started writing about social media verification was 2009 for Media Shift, when you were, I think, there back when. My question is, how far have we really moved in the past 5 years? Because these themes, as you know, they're really important, and I think the handbook's fantastic, and I'm glad it's out there. But so many newsrooms seem still to be lagging. So many individual journalists seem still to be lagging. I'm wondering how much progress you think, those of you who've been in this, Claire and others.
I would say very little progress, and that's because people don't know what they don't know. Yeah. So you don't go to sleep at night being like, I'm really worried I don't know about Google Advanced Search, because you think you know Google. And I know this because this is my profession, but there's very little training within the journalism profession because there's not money in it. But we're in a point now in the industry that we have to give people these skills. It's non-negotiable. Yeah. And I would argue, I could have been on this panel in 2009 and we would have used this, we would have mentioned the same tools because technology hasn't moved on. Yeah. We would have said Whois and reverse image search. So I really think it has to be proper training and a recognition from the senior levels that this is non-negotiable.
And that's still in progress, obviously.
Yeah.
And I would also say that I think newsrooms should sort of ignore this at their cost. I mean, we had someone on a panel this morning who's a lawyer who was saying, legally you could get in so much hot water by actually not doing the work that it doesn't really, I think there'll be one test case and everyone will be absolutely terrified. So you actually have to get on and do it.
I think there have been some big stories. The Boston Marathon was certainly one that have highlighted the media's failures to verify, that have raised awareness, and there's no question that a lot of the people who will download the Verification Handbook aren't the people who need it. but I think that each thing like this and each conference like this and the finger pointing and hand wringing after something like the Boston Marathons, which had multiple screw ups, raise awareness. So I'm not going to claim lots of progress, but I think I see movement.
I want to. I don't want to get too depressing, but I do want to raise one thing I think might be a factor, and that is that some journalists and some media entities don't care. What they want is traffic and readers. And so you get that by publishing something that seems great, and then maybe you get more readers when you correct it later. And so the incentive isn't there because you're going to get lots of readers for this thing that may or may not be true. And you can say, we didn't have time to verify it, or this is based on Twitter, and so we can't say whether it's credible or not. And that's effectively just a cop-out. You're saying we're willing to sacrifice, our credibility to get some page views. And I think there are sites that are willing to do that.
But
let me be hopeful. Let me end it on maybe a hopeful note. So I've been writing and researching in this area for almost now a decade, which is depressing to say, but it's true. And so I feel like there has been some change. I think the points that have been made are completely valid. I think that there are some news organizations now, that look at everybody rushing to put up that really amazing image that turns out to be fake, that see people going for that quick hit, that sort of short play, and realize that actually, we can distinguish ourselves and we can actually get a pretty good amount of traffic if we're the ones who just wait a little bit and be the debunker of that fake image. So I see a little bit of an editorial strategy around that. It's early. The other piece is I've never seen in roughly in the decade as many people talking about and writing about and researching verification. So those are things that make me kind of hopeful. There is a critical need for better training in newsrooms. I agree with the point that the people who need it most may still not be aware, or may not be the ones inclined to do it, and so it's part of our job as people who participated in this project to help spread it. And I hope all of you who are here will do that with, whether you're a journalist or not, with friends, colleagues, family members, because, we need to create nodes of truth on these networks as much as the fake information replicates. And that's a role for absolutely everybody. And the more of us that do it, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah.
So be happy.
So this handbook is the first step it's a incremental step maybe, but we are, just because our director of the EJC is here, I can make a case that we are planning to launch a website dedicated to the verification, probably around summer. And we will continue working in this field, and so keep checking our website of the Verification Handbook. We are also working several language versions, including Arabic, Spanish, Portuguese, Greek, Japanese, Ukrainian. And if there's any volunteers of working on to work on this the translation into Italian or any other languages, please let me know. And thank you very much for the discussion, and hopefully you got a lot of takeaways from this session.